Hi, I'm Grace Judson. I am a speaker, trainer, coach, consultant on all things leadership, specifically for the first line manager and supervisor. They're the ones who have the most impact on the vast majority of every company's employees. And they're also the ones, as I'll cover in what is going to be a brief presentation on helping them manage stress in this very strange time that we're in. They are also the ones who are being kind of squashed between their own stress, their team stress, their families, all the things, right? So with that, let's go to the slides. Okay, yes, we are very definitely, as I said, dealing with stress. And I don't mean to say that these first line managers are the only ones by any means experiencing stress. So I'm actually going to start with what I promise you will be the only cliche that I throw at you today, but it is an important point, and it is a cliche for a reason. Some have called it the greatest cliche of all time, and that is that good old saying, put the oxygen mask on yourself first. As someone supporting first line managers in your organization, you have to support yourself as well. It's that old thing. If you don't support yourself, how will you support other people? So all the things that I talk about here, when I talk about listening, for instance, and give you some super simple, super effective tools on how to listen within this context, think about who listens to you. Think about who you can ask to support you, how you can support yourself. Who can talk to you about the stress that you're experiencing, whether it's a family member, a friend, a consultant, a coach, a counselor, your boss, whoever it is. I want to really ask you and encourage you to get support for yourself as well as offering it to others. So, most people tell you to listen, which is a great thing, right? It's important. We are told that because it's important, but we don't typically have classes in how to listen. We might have classes through school, in grade school on up, really, at how to write. We have classes sometimes on how to speak. People will take programs in public speaking or presentation skills, or they'll go to Toastmasters. But we don't have a lot on how to listen. Yeah, there are various programs out there about things like active listening and so on, but they're not part of the general educational system. And that kind of active listening is really more intended for things like conflict management or negotiation or working in teams, and less for the kinds of things that we need in this moment, this time of heightened stress. Everyone is facing a lot of stress. Will they have a job? What about getting sick? What about getting set up to work from home? How to manage if they or somebody they know, somebody on their team, somebody in their family gets sick? On and on, right down to how to safely buy the freaking groceries, right? The first line manager has to help their team cope, because we all know that stress at home becomes, you can't leave it at home. It comes to the office with you. If you're working from home, it's obviously still there with you. They have to cope with their family stress. They have to cope with their own stress. And let's face it, stress rolls downhill. They have to cope with their manager's stress as well. I mean, how many stories have we all heard at this point about micromanaging because suddenly people are working from home and people aren't sure how to make sure that the work is getting done in the most effective way? Okay, I don't need to convince you of all that. You're watching this so you can learn how to help these stressed out managers, not because you need convincing that they need help. So let's talk about what you can do to help. I can't speak to any of the policies or options your company is offering to employees. This is specifically about offering support to those stressed out frontline managers so they don't burn out and potentially take their teams down with them, because that tends to be what happens. And as I said, remember, these things apply to you too. So, okay, listening. Why am I talking about listening? Simply because it is one of the most effective ways to offer someone a little bit of stress relief. We talk about venting, we talk about letting off steam. These are important ways to help somebody relieve some of the pressure. And how else can we do this but by listening to them, right? So how do we listen better in order to help someone let off steam in a way that is actually productive and helpful? Again, this isn't about fixing anyone or anything. Let's look at the first tip that I have to offer you. And it is my all-time favorite question. What is the worst thing about this for you? I call this the magical question. Why do I call it the magical question? Well, let's take a look at what is actually happening in the brain and in the neuroscience and a little bit of the emotional practical application of what happens here. You are probably familiar with that lovely thing called the amygdala hijack. And that is when, okay, we all love to think that we live in that rational part of our brain most of the time. But the fact of the matter is that whenever there is stress involved, we are probably not all that rational, right? And in fact, what happens is that we drop into the emotional processing center of the brain. And even in the case of the amygdala hijack, we get into the survival, the fight, freeze, flight brain. And when this happens, it is literally true. This is not an exaggeration, but it is literally true. We are not in the part of the brain that can process logic. And I know this may sound a little strange, but if you have ever been especially upset about something, you know what happens when somebody tries to calm you down, right? You're overreacting, this isn't such a big deal, sleep on it, you'll feel better in the morning, here are all the things you should do. It doesn't end well that way, does it? You just get more upset. So trying to be logical, which is what we try to do in a professional work environment, trying to be logical doesn't really go over well when somebody is having an emotional response or under a great deal of stress. So when we look at that, this question, what's the worst thing about this for you, is transformative. It is transformative for two reasons. One reason is that it helps the person really get, when you ask it sincerely, that you truly want to know and you're not rushing them through their emotional response. You're not asking them to behave differently or feel differently. You're asking, hey, wow, what's really going on here? What's the worst thing about this for you? I want to make the point, you can ask yourself this question. Like I said earlier, you can use a lot of what we're talking about here to help yourself feel better and less stressed as well. That question really gets somebody grounded in the sense that you care, that you want to understand what they're going through. The next thing that happens is that here's an interesting fact, again, about the brain. Because you are asking a question that is asking them to compare two things or compare multiple things, out of all the really lousy things that are going on right now, what is the worst? That is a logical function. It's a compare and contrast function. Guess what? That happens in the logical brain. So when you ask that, they have to come at least partway up out of that survival and emotional brain in order to give you an answer. I love this question. It really is transformative, and I do not use that word lightly. So, okay, once they have answered, then what? Well, you can ask them to go deeper with it because you'll probably get a fairly quick answer. Now, when I say go deeper with it, I do not mean this. This is a very traditional, long-time coachy sort of question to ask. Say more about that. But when somebody is in this kind of stressed out place, that can feel pushy. It can put them on the defensive. It sounds coachy, and so all of a sudden you will have stepped out of I am being a caring listener into, well, now I'm going to start trying to coach you through this, and that's not what you want. You're not trying to coach anybody through this. Okay, so what do you do instead? I'm so glad you asked. All right, the first thing that I'm going to give you here is something called mirroring. And mirroring is probably not what you have heard called mirroring before. Mirroring is where you take a couple of words, a phrase, the key phrase out of what they have said, and repeat it back to them as a question, so with a slight uptick in your tone. So it might go like this. What's the worst thing about this for you? Well, wow, you know, I am really worried about my mother. She's old, she's not in the best of health, and I'm just really concerned about what all of this could be doing to her. Okay, that's a good start, but it doesn't, it's a factual answer. It doesn't really get to the point where they are really going to be able to release some of that anxiety and stress. So, worried about your mother might be one way to mirror back to them. Not sure how she's handling it, could be another way. And then be quiet, because you have to give them that space to continue their story. And they will. So they might go on then and say, yeah, she's older, she's got, you know, severe asthma already. She's got a caretaker that comes in every day to help, but I don't know, you know, where has that caretaker been? What might they bring into the house? And, you know, I'm so far away and I can't go visit. And I just, yeah, I'm really anxious and really worried about her. It will happen. It's like magic. So here's another trick that you can use, or a tool, I'll say, you can use. And it is called labeling. Labeling is when you make a hypothetical statement about how they might be feeling. You listen to what they have to say, and then you say something like, it sounds like you're really close to your mom. It sounds like you'd love to be there on site, but obviously that's just not possible. It sounds like you're really worried about what is up with the caretaker. And then again, wait, quiet. And obviously, I hope obviously, you wouldn't say all of those things. I just gave you a bunch of examples that you could say. The thing about these tools is that it really helps them dig into what is going on in ways that they may not even be aware of themselves. You may be able to give them insights, and they might even be able then to say, hey, you know what? I should call the caretaker. You don't want to suggest that. This is not about coaching them. I keep coming back to that because, look, we all want to help people, right? But the best way you can help in this case is just to be quiet and let them help themselves. I could call the caretaker and find out how they're taking precautions. I could ask a neighbor. You know, there are all kinds of things, insights that they could start to have. And that gives them control in a situation that is so out of control right now for so many people. So these tools will help them come up with ideas and help them, as I said, let off some steam. So I keep saying this is not about fixing, but what can you fix? How can you perhaps make some adjustments within the organization? I don't know what your organization, what your company is willing or able to do. But along with asking what's the worst thing and labeling and mirroring, ask them, what do you need in this time? And you can preface that if you need to by saying, you know, there may not be anything that I can help with, but what do you need? And this is another way for them to begin to explore how to gain control over the situation for themselves, because if they can articulate something they need, they may be able to give it to themselves. If you can articulate something you need, you may be able to give it to yourself. Not everyone is going to answer honestly, not everyone is going to answer at all, but you might get some great ideas that you could apply across all your teams. And I'll be willing to bet some of the answers will probably surprise you. And that's kind of fun, right? So finally, please make sure that you and your people are taking time off. Now, I know obviously nobody's taking, the vacations that they had planned this summer, but I read an article recently, and unfortunately I don't have the reference to give to you, but what this article pointed out, which one thing we all know, which is that here in the US, we are really bad at taking time off. We are bad at taking our allotted vacation time. And during the pandemic, we are even worse. People are taking almost no time at all, and yet they are under all this extra stress and needing to decompress. So time off is important, and apparently there's one company, again, I wish I had the reference for you, that said, okay, y'all aren't taking your time off, we're gonna shut down for a full day, nobody is working. So encourage your people to take time off, and encourage yourself to take time off. And when everybody is like, but what will we do? We can't go anywhere. Brainstorm things that you can do. I will give you a reference to a video that I did that's over on YouTube that talks about brainstorming with a remote team. So this could be really fun, right? And work should be more fun, especially when everybody is stressed. So get everybody together on your team on a Zoom call and use some of the techniques that I talk about in that brainstorming video to brainstorm ways to have fun at home when you take some time off at home. It's, brainstorming doesn't have to just be about problem solving for business. It can be about how to have fun in this extremely strange and stressful time. So please encourage people to take time off. Please take time off yourself. Please use these tools to help yourself as well as your teams. And I want to say as well that these tools are not just for right now, and they're not just for business. They are great tools for any kind of communication. This is the kind of stuff I love teaching, whether it's about conflict negotiation, managing teams in a more productive and better way. So here is how you can reach me. That's my website, that's my LinkedIn, YouTube channel I've mentioned. I have a bunch of stuff over there. Please let me know if you have any questions. I am happy to answer questions about this or anything else related to communication and management, especially as it has to do with that first line manager. Remember to take care of yourself. We will all get through this. One of the things that I have said to people repeatedly and that they appear to find useful, they tell me they find it useful, is that there is a future you that knows how we got through this, that knows how you got through this. We don't get to know that right now. All we can do is the best we can do right now. And helping yourself and your teams manage stress in the best possible way, using these tools and any others that you might have at your fingertips, that's the best we can do right now. So take care, be safe, be well, stay sane.